Good morning. I hope that your week is off to a good start. We are walking with Jesus through the book of Mark. Last week we talked about how Jesus went about doing healings, and we talked about what that means for us today. Many times the understanding of healing gets misinterpreted for our use today, and we needed to talk about that. But today I want us to focus not just on general healing, but on one particular healing. So today we're looking at what we find in Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 45. Here's the story. A leper came to Jesus. In that world, at that time, there was very little hope medically for someone who was critically ill. And being a leper may have been the very worst of all, because not only was he terminal, he was suffering, and he was outcast. Not only was there no hope for him in the medicine of the day, but he was also not allowed to be with his family, and he was not allowed to be with anyone except others who shared his disease. And so his entire world would have been wrapped up in just a world of misery, not only his own, but those around him. And it would have been a terrible situation. He was suffering, obviously, physically, but suffering physically is one thing. Being condemned to loneliness is quite another thing. And he was both. A leper, outcast from society. There was no hope for him at all. He lived in a situation where in his day there was no hope, except he heard about Jesus. Maybe there might be some hope, he must have thought. And so he evidently had confidence as he had thought through this. I don't know, we don't know how much time went in between when he first heard about Jesus and his healings until he decided to go, but he evidently had confidence that Jesus could help him. It was the only question that was there was not whether Jesus could, it was a question of whether Jesus would. It was the question of whether Jesus was willing. But there was nothing else to shoot for. There was no other hope. There was no other avenue by which he was going to receive any kind of positive attention. And so when all of your hope is gone, you're going to do anything that's necessary. And so this man came to Jesus. And when he came, he said something to Jesus that's very interesting. It was not a question. He was not coming asking to be healed. He simply made an amazing statement of fact, indicating the confidence that he had in Jesus' abilities. He said, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Indeed, in there is some confidence. But what a moment that was in the life of that very sick man. He came, he made the statement of fact to Jesus, knowing that Jesus had the power, but he didn't know what Jesus was going to say. He didn't know how Jesus was going to respond to him. After all, everybody else had shunned him. Everybody else had rejected him and even avoided him. But here he is, standing before Jesus with his entire future in the balance. What's going to happen next is going to determine the rest of his life. So he made the statement. I suppose that he had hoped for Jesus to simply speak the leprosy away. But what happened next would have shocked him, and it would have shocked anybody else that was around him, because everybody knew that you don't touch a leper. And everyone knew that lepers are unclean. Everybody knew that if you yourself wanted to remain in good standing in the community and with your family, you simply kept your distance from the lepers. But Jesus reached out and touched him. And then as Jesus touched him, he said, "I am willing, be cleansed." And immediately the leper was no longer a leper. He was no longer outcast. He was no longer without hope or a future, and he was no longer alone. Those days were all past him because he had come in contact with Jesus, and Jesus was willing to cleanse his life. If Jesus did that for him, imagine what he can do for us. Jesus reached out and touched him. In fact, Jesus has reached out and touched us as well. His grace is mighty. And just as much as that leper was in need of Jesus, so are we. We may not have an instantaneous healing of our physical situation, but when Jesus reaches out and touches us, the assurance there is of our eternity with him as long as we walk faithfully with him. We're no longer outcast. We're no longer without hope. We're no longer without a future, and we are certainly no longer alone. That leper was in desperate need of contact with Jesus, and Jesus reached out and touched him. What's that say for us? Imagine the amazing thing that he has in store for us. He invites us into eternity. He invites us into the fullness of life. He invites us into a fellowship with others who are like-minded in this wonderful fellowship in Christ. Jesus has indeed reached out, and he's wanting to touch every person. I'm afraid some people shy away. Some people avoid him because they're not sure what to expect. But you see, Jesus has the power to cleanse. And if we will allow it, he will indeed cleanse us. I hope today, the rest of this day, you walk as a cleansed person. Just as much as that leper was cleansed, I hope you walk as one who has been made new in Christ. What a blessing we have. And I'm so grateful that that leper had the courage to stand before Jesus. When we do, then we too are cleansed. He gives us that opportunity. We'll continue this tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.
They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Words of life, words of hope.